Hey folks, welcome to the Photo Tristan Show. Today I'm going to talk about the FujiFilm X100 camera, which I've got right here. And I'm going to do sort of a review on it, but rather than go through all the technical details of this camera, which you can easily look online for or find on other people's reviews, I'm going to talk about my impressions of this camera and basically whether or not I think it's worth the price that they're charging for it. So this is the camera here, and as you can see it's got a neat retro design and feel to it. Retro look, sort of reminiscent of an old maybe Leica M3 or Canonet camera, or maybe other old rangefinder from, you know, the maybe 60s or 70s. But of course this is a digital camera. It's a 12 megapixel digital camera. It's got a great sensor and lens combination. The lens is a 35mm equivalent, and the sensor is an APS-C size sensor. So really the sensor is much bigger than, say, an Olympus pen or Panasonic, I think it's GF1 model sensor. The FujiFilm X100 has a larger sensor. So it's about 3/4 of the size of, say, a full-frame digital SLR sensor, whereas the Olympus pen cameras are only about half the size. So the larger the sensor, certainly the better the quality, and also the larger the sensor, the shallower depth of field you can have when shooting at, wide open lens apertures. So this camera does a great job with the bokeh, the out of focus areas, so that's a plus. Certainly better than the Micro Four Thirds cameras, which only have a smaller sensor, about half the size of a full frame camera. Again, this one is about 3/4 of the size. So I definitely recommend this camera, the X100, over a Micro Four Thirds camera. So if you do absolutely have to have a smaller than DSLR form factor, and you also have to have interchangeable lenses, well then of course I would recommend you get the Micro Four Thirds camera, such as the Olympus or the Panasonic. But if you can do with just the 35mm equivalent fixed lens, I would recommend the Fuji X100. Let me get a sip of beer here real quick. The build quality on this is quite nice. It's like a full metal body. It seems very sturdy, although for the price I do think the build quality could be even slightly better. There are a few things on this camera that feel a little bit cheapy, namely the plastic control dial back here and some of the buttons on the back and such. I really can't complain too much. This camera has provided me really great results. Results almost as good as a DSLR, and in some cases better, because it doesn't have any mirror vibration when you press the shutter. There's no mirror in this, it's just a leaf shutter. So if you hold it really steady, you can get some very, very sharp shots with this. And again, the sensor and lens work together on this camera very well to provide image quality that rivals DSLR. So I really do recommend it for that purpose. And again, the size and the look of it is just tops, so I really like that. It's a very stylish camera in terms of the way it looks, and also the results that you get as well are very nice. So it has built-in different color modes which sort of simulate film, such as FujiFilm, such as Provia, Velvia. Also it has a bunch of black and white modes. Another great thing about this camera is that it has a very high flash sync speed. So you can attach a flash to it and sync at a very high speed. Also, it has a built-in neutral density filter as well, so you can shoot at a low f-stop, low aperture, out in the bright sunlight and things like that. So that's very handy. As you can see, also the top plate has the dials, very much like a manual camera, an old manual camera, so you can have full manual control, which is really very nice. And it has full manual mode too in terms of focusing. It has full manual focusing. However, one complaint I have with this camera is it's certainly not a Leica M camera, in that it is not a rangefinder focus. So when you look through the viewfinder, you're still even if it's on manual focus mode, you're still focusing electronically. When you turn the dial, it's focusing electronically. So the best tip for you that I have on that is, if you're shooting in manual focus mode, press the autofocus lock button on the back to autofocus first and get it close, and then you can tweak your focus manually with the focus ring on the front. The focus ring on the front does feel quite good and does turn nicely, however it is still an electronic focus. It is not a rangefinder camera. So in that respect, I sort of wish that the Fujifilm X100 was a rangefinder, because I much prefer that type of focusing mechanism. It's just so much more choice. That said though, I can't really fault this camera, because it doesn't ever purport really to be a rangefinder, although it sort of looks like one. Fuji never markets it as a rangefinder. Now that being said, while this is certainly no Leica M camera, it is also much cheaper A Leica M9, for example, is about US $7,000, whereas this is US $1,200. And in fact, some of the images out of this rival the images out of the Leica M shot with a 35mm lens equivalent, so which is what this has. So you really do have to take that in consideration when you look at it that way. The FujiFilm X100 is really an amazing camera in that the results and some of the operation in terms of the form factor and the way that it shoots when you're out on the street, for instance, can really rival that of a Leica M9. So that's something to be aware of with this camera. So that's really my only one minor complaint about this camera is the focusing and the fact that it's not a rangefinder. But again, it's minor. So do I recommend this camera for the price? Well, I do recommend the camera for the price, although I think it is a little bit slightly a bit too expensive. Now, as I mentioned, the build quality is quite sturdy. It does feel, like a very high quality camera that should last you quite a long time. However, I do feel that the build quality could be even better at this price point. So maybe if it was $100 less or $200 less, I would feel a little bit better about recommending this camera for the price. However, at the current price of US $1,200 or so dollars, I still do recommend this camera and like it a lot. It is a pretty revolutionary camera in that it's the first camera that has a hybrid viewfinder, meaning an optical viewfinder with an overlay when you look through it, but also the capability of having an electronic viewfinder in the same viewfinder by flipping the switch on the front. That way you can toggle back and forth between the electronic viewfinder as well as the optical viewfinder. Now the optical viewfinder on this is really very nice because when you're looking through it, it is much like a rangefinder or a Leica in that you can see the frame lines, and when you take a picture or when you look through it, you can see what's outside of the frame lines, so you can then recompose your shot if somebody's moving around or if somebody then moves into your frame. You can better anticipate your shots that way. So that's a really nice feature. The optical viewfinder is really beautiful on this camera. It shows you all the information you need to know when you're looking through it. In fact, with the sort of like a heads-up display, it's almost like a heads-up display, you can actually press buttons to show more or less information in the optical viewfinder, depending on what your preferences are. So that's a really nice feature. So all in all, I have to say that I really do like this camera. The results and images I get from it do rival my full-frame DSLR camera. And in terms of a camera that you can take with you practically anywhere very comfortably, this is a great camera to do so because it's very light. It's much lighter than my DSLR, much less cumbersome to take with me everywhere, and it also looks a lot cooler too. So if I go into a fancy restaurant, this camera will fit right in, for instance, and it won't stick out as much as a DSLR. Now that being said, because this does not have interchangeable lenses, it's certainly not as useful as a DSLR. So it complements my DSLR quite nicely, but certainly doesn't replace it. I like all the different lenses, high-end lenses and things like that I have for my DSLR, and I certainly wouldn't trade those away because I would be just too limited in a lot of things that I want to do. But again, for a go-everywhere camera or a travel camera or just a camera to take with me any place, I think the Fuji X100 is a real winner. So thanks very much for watching my thoughts on the FujiFilm X100. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. And I do tend to do a lot of reviews on camera stuff, on Apple technology, and just general interest, money-saving reviews as well. So if any of those things interest you, please go ahead and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Thanks.